But we're going to start that shortly. Pre-game show here real quick. Let's see, what did I do? Got this in the mail. Makes me very happy. This is Toynbee's An Historian's Approach to Religion, which he does a fine job of dignifying the questions without siding with an answer. And that is the historian's overview. And he has one sentiment here that is very nice that I like. One of the things that I enjoy about reading, not just history, but also literature overall, is that he talks about the self-centeredness of the individual human being and the self-centeredness of each generation, that each generation's problems seem to be the world-ending ones. It is kind of characteristic of many generations in at least the Western European tradition that this is the last one. This is the apocalypse. Things are really bad right now, and it's the end. And every generation thinks it's the end. And that's sort of like the chauvinism, the self-centeredness. And when you read history, when you read literature, you understand that generation thought that they were just as important as we do in our generation, and that they were just as pivotal. So that actually enables you to develop a link between them, between now and the past, between your self-centeredness as an individual and as a generation and theirs, and then kind of come to appreciate the weight of their experience. So even though it is far removed from you in terms of economy, sense experience, place, time, culture, language, you still can understand it. And that's one of the magics of written records. And so that is a pleasure, continuing as always to read Ritchie now that I have much of it. And also today I spent some time for the first time in a very long while on something that I'm going to show you, which is this right here. This is a lot of work to translate 3 lines of Old English. And in Driving Off the Map, my big sort of like well-received Metal Gear Solid 2 essay, in Monstrous Births, the Metal Gear Solid 4 essay, and also in A Memory of Fire essay on The Evil Within 2, I talk about something called form, which I kind of describe in a very loose way, and I think that comes from my experience with poetry, and I think what I'm going to show you here is maybe a pretty good example of that, and might actually open up some of those essays to maybe a little more clarity than I provide in my definition of terms. Good evening, Space Ammo. It's good to see you. I think you will find this interesting. But yeah, so I spent about 2 hours today translating 3 lines because the note here at the top is verse indeterminate Saxon, meaning there was no standardized orthography for Old English, so sometimes you have a vowel that could be represented as A in one text, and that same verb could have that vowel represented as OE in another. And when you're looking it up in a dictionary, you kind of have to figure out what makes sense, and if what you're looking at doesn't make sense, consider that there is another spelling out there that is the guest you want to invite over. And we're going to look at that real fast here. There we go. So, these are the first 3 lines of The Descent into Hell, and for some context on this, I mean, Old English literature, along with the church and Christianity came a lot of literary preservation. With King Alfred, with the monasteries, that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. So a lot of the poetry and everything is written from within the Christian tradition. And this poem is I believe, apocryphal, if you're looking at biblical canon, but nonetheless culturally important, harrowing of hell, whereby the story is that Jesus, upon resurrection, goes down into hell, breaks open the gates, and steals away the deserving who existed before salvation came to earth, therefore, as a matter of justice, comes down and gives him a hand. And so this is the start of a poem that is about that. And it begins with begins at the burial mound. You've got the Marys, and is Martha out there? I don't remember. Anyway, you've got the women in his entourage out there because they were the only ones paying attention and not scared to death after all the bad stuff went down. And so this is about them being there outside it, and this is the verse. Let's see. Ongunon him onuchtan athel kundamaith, gierwon to geonge. Wistan gumene gemut athlinges lich ertharna bethet. I think that's ertharna. Ertherna bethiet. And so when I talk about form, this is very clearly alliterative verse. That is one of the things that Old English is sort of notoriously known for. It prioritizes alliteration on a given line rather than end rhyme, which is a more sort of Romance language convention. And my heart lives here. My heart lives in these alliterative structures. And so you have units of meaning. Obviously, the meaning is conveyed by the words chosen, right? So, ongunon him onuchtan athelkunde meith girwan togeanda. Ongunon, that means to begin, and him is, it's another form of them. It's an archaic form of them. Uchtan is no, not ucht, that ucht, that's it, ucht. Ucht is a fantastic word because it means the liminal time of day. And it could, the guard of guards, evening arc, it's good to see you. Well, the second one here, this one is my my translation. So any flaws in there owe to me, and any improvements there on my shoulders, and not the original author. And yes, good evening, Ark. Looking at a couple of Old English lines here. But yeah, uchtan is a very interesting word because it means the liminal times of day. I mean, I don't know, man. I think the repetition is worth experimenting with to see if it feels right. Sometimes it does. I mean, it works with a phrase like the Holy of Holies, you know, something like that. That besides having, you know, the semantic meaning, also has that sort of alliterative oomph, and the repetition makes it easier to remember than many other kinds of liturgical phrasing. But yeah, anyway, uchtan. This means the liminal time of day. So that word can either mean dawn or dusk. And the only reason that it is known that it means dawn here is the fact that that's what the story is, that this happens in dawn, and there's a lot of, you know, literature around that. Athelkunde means the noble kind. So you can tell the alliterative words on this line because even though alliteration is typically reserved for consonants, in this case, when you have any vowels that are your repeated initial sounds, that is considered an alliterative element. There's no M in this line in the first side of the caesura, so the vowels have to be it. And this is where this is where form becomes meaningful. Every word that alliterates has a significant relationship to the other words, and you have to sort of intuit what that means. It's not something that's going to be worn on its sleeve. It's not something that's going to be explicit. But ongonan, meaning to begin. Uchtan, sorry, I keep getting that U wrong. Uchtan, ongonan, uchtan, athelkunde. So begin, dawn. I mean, that makes sense, right? Because dawn is when you begin. But then the more interesting thing happens with athelkunde, because that means they're noble. So why are they noble? Something has their nobility. The form tells you. This is so cool. The form tells you that their nobility is significantly, intrinsically connected to the fact that they are beginning at dawn, and it is not about the time of day, it is about the task at hand. So the fact that they are there, they're the only ones brave enough to show up and take ownership over Christ's body in this instance, because the apostles are all hiding, their nobility is directly related to the fact that they are showing up to take ownership of the situation. And that is what the form tells you, that the verse, the lettering of the verse does not. And yeah, so this is, let's see, Gerwan to Geonga, Wistan Gumana Yamut. Gerwan means to prepare. I translated that as gear because I like the ger. That makes sense to me. Geonga is gang, like gangway, German gangen. That means to leave. So going away, the guard of men. In this one, gumana means that means man. That means and man in sort of like the broader sense of humanity. And in some cases, very specifically men, but in this case, Gerwan, Geong, Gomana. These are your connecting ideas. These are the connecting sounds. And so right at the start, you are like, okay, these words have some meaning and some relationship to each other. Gearing up, going away, being alive, humanity. Like the the bodiness, the humanity. That is what is being prepared to go away. And Athlingus Lich Ertharna Betheart. Athling, that's Lord, that's what that means. Ertharna, that means the grave. It's actually a really neat kenning there. Ertharna means earth home. So the grave is the home in the earth. And so here you have Athlingus, which is the Lord, Jesus in this case. He is directly identified with the grave because he's dead. And so that is what, when I talk about form, when I talk about form in a video game, in a movie, this is where my frame of reference is coming from. It is when the way something is told tells you more about what you are experiencing than the content or the information on the face of it goes. It's like you can never really summarize a poem because once you take it out of its form, you strip away so much of the native environment that gives it the meaning that it intends to have, or whether intention aside, that it should have because of how the form conveys that. Chiara, anxiety experience just before dawn. Yes, chiara turns into care. Care is actually not a great positive word in Old English. To have care in your heart is to be burdened with anxiety and responsibility. And 9 times out of 10, grief and remorse, because everybody you know is dead, because that happens a lot in a warrior culture. But that's form. And now we're ready to hop into some Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. Kind of a feeling the more obscure some of these pregame shows go, the more they fight against their intent. I think they probably drive people away more than they pull them in, but who cares? Do you know elegies? I am not familiar with that work. That's right, sift away the weak. Well, based off the numbers, I actually get a much larger viewership on the VOD than than during the actual stream itself. So anybody who is not into it is well equipped to skip ahead. Oh, right. I actually need to click back over to the game, don't I? Here we go. And yeah, just as you are in a VOD, you are being captured forever, and you're like a soul trapped in a photograph. Little bits of you will be preserved until finally the VOD expires, in which case you get them back as kind of a interest. Oh, but yeah, so to read my own translation of this. They celebrated women started at first sun to gear him for going away. The guard of men they knew had locked the Lord with lodestone and earth walls. So my attempt there is to keep the idea of locking, of putting Jesus in an earth house by taking Lord, locked, and lodestone being the thing that covers it. So it's not a literal translation, but it is an alliterative translation that maintains the form and also uses that form to connect significant words to each other in a way that similarly relates that meaning. And I gotta say, I feel pretty good about that first line. I'm pretty proud of that. Celebrated women started at first sun. So just completely avoiding dawn and finding another word that keeps this sound so it stays alliterative. Feels good. Feels good.